Hi, my name's Paul Marco, and I'm especially, well, we're all especially privileged because we have a man that's really doing something. He's capable, and he's really doing something to help the targeted community that I call the selected community. This man is a medical doctor, and he's also working closely with PTSD patients and targeted individuals, and he's got a lot of knowledge about what they're going through and a lot of techniques that will probably help them. He is going to be helping us with the Pinecone Utopia portal, which is an open source investigation on how TIs can manage to get through the suffering, on what we can do to pull out of it perhaps. But I want to introduce you to a guy that I've been so impressed with. Since he's written us some emails, and I've got to talk to him a little while just now, Dr. Robin Kelly. Dr. Kelly, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we can start talking?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Paul. About myself. Well, I mean, first of all, I'm a family man and a granddad and I enjoy life, and I hopefully respect all life and people. I put that number one before I'm saying I'm a doctor, because if you go through what I've done in my life, I'm a qualified medical doctor, qualified in 1974 in London. Spent 6 years in hospital practice, and came out here to New Zealand, where I went into family practice. In the 80s, I became very interested in acupuncture and Eastern philosophy in general, and particularly I integrated that into my practice. And over the last, I've been in practice now for, 36 years or so. And that's become more and more of my practice, to the point that we now work at home. I work at home with my wife, and we run which is quite a unique practice, where we spend at least half an hour with each person, but usually an hour. We're looking for meaning in chronic illness. We're looking for how we can infuse each healing with the soul of the person coming to see us. So basically, we are trying to custom build the healing plan for each individual. I do my regular practice as well. To keep my doctor ticket, I have to do quite a lot of ongoing exams, and I work at also a student health counselling service, medical and counselling service at the university here, which introduces me to so many people from around the world, and actually has been an education for me. So over the last 20 years, I've written a few books. The first one was and how I integrate Chinese philosophy in with Western medicine. I don't see these as two dualities. I see these as ideally an integrated process. Then I wrote the next one called The Human Antenna, which basically sees the growth of our consciousness in parallel with some of the challenges we have in life, not just health challenges, but also situational challenges, and that we are both receivers and emitters of consciousness. That consciousness passes through us and manifests itself when we are being our most creative and our most joyful and mindful. And then the last book I wrote was called The Human Hologram, because it actually goes away from the fact that we are this entity of which is receiving and transmitting, but we are actually holographically part of this universe, and that it's not just them, it and us. We are it. We are our own universe. And when I wrote the last book and I finished that's when my life decided to take another turn. And basically through a series of traumatic events over the last 7 years, I've been clobbered and financially got at to an extreme extent by a construction company here. We lost a court case. We've now found that the judge and the main defendant are business partners. During this time, I've become particularly interested in, I felt fairly targeted. I felt an empathy with so many people, and as what happens organically in this situation, people who are in similar situations tend to be attracted to us. And one of the ways I've found to personally heal from this is to use any experience I've had to try and help others. But also, it's a two-way process. I learn more and more about this. And so when I came across Pine Utopia and some of the wonderful work the group is doing there, I found so many parallels, this extreme example, particularly of those targeted individuals through electromagnetic sort of ways. I found that this was an extreme example of the people that I'm trying to help as well, because in fact, and I broadened this into all those people who are out there suffering from narcissistic abuse, which I would say is 99.9% of our population in one way or another.
Yes.
So I'm only too happy to add anything I can to this whole field, because the solution is going to be a lot of smart people and empathetic people getting together and creating not only a database but a community, which actually means that we're going to escape the actions, the very devious actions of this group or a group of entities or whatever they are out there.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much. If you send us a list of those books, we'll put them below the video.
Oh, thank you.
So we'll just remember to do that.
I mean, the other book that has been a godsend to me is, and you'll probably notice, is Paul Levy's Dispelling Witico, and I can't speak highly enough about this. I can talk later about that as well, because this provides a deep understanding of what many people are going through. There you go. I'll talk about that later.
That's great. Okay, well, we were very impressed with first of all, your interest in target individuals, because there are doctors that'll stay clear of them. There's doctors that won't work with them, and you're diving into it, first of all, and second of all, diving into it with knowledge of consciousness, some of these Eastern techniques that might work, and some other things. So you seem like the perfect person to start us off thinking about how we should be thinking if we're a targeted individual. How should we be thinking about what's happening to us, and how do you probably counsel people, I know I do, that are in these situations all the time. Give us a little idea of your whole perspective on this. How do you start working with people on this? Is that a good question? Or?
Well,
okay.
No, it's a very good question, and I think hard about it. I think that it is clear that most of us carry a huge amounts of shame, and that the first thing I can do to help somebody else is to be alongside them and to understand the shame that they carry. And I've come to this conclusion from understanding the amount of shame that we all carry, and I carry as well. And so the first thing we should do if we're helping others is to listen to them and be alongside them. And in fact, as Gandhi said, you meet them with your being. Okay, you do not with your judgment, with your being, and you listen intensely. Now, what I've learned about this personally is how and the word gaslighting comes to mind, how we've all been gaslighted, because infused in any abuse is a sense of that it is the person deserves this, or it's the person's fault. and they had it coming to them. And this seems to be completely common with all narcissistic abuse, from sexual abuse of children right through to what the TIs are experiencing. So what that any other person needs is a person alongside them who understands that. But you go a little bit beyond just being their advocate, because it's so easy when somebody comes in to say these things. Hey, look, you weren't to blame or whatever. It doesn't seem to penetrate until you just with them for some time. The understanding what happens to the body in post-traumatic stress is important, because we have learned a lot from those who are suffering from post-traumatic stress from either abuse like sexual abuse or actually being in a war zone. What happens to certain parts in the brain, and we talk about the amygdala, the limbic system, and how that becomes hyperactive, the amygdala, and then eventually after time, like anything hyperactive, it can burn out and shrink down. And so what happens in complex post-traumatic stress, which we're learning much more about, is slightly different from that, because the insults are coming all the time at the person, as are the triggers are coming all the time. And is actually the condition of the day, because those who are not aware of this won't be aware that every time they talk, they look at the news, for instance, the mainstream news, there's a further input into the system, which will either desensitize them or trigger them. But more often it'll desensitize them and try to hypnotize them and send them to sleep. But we do know that that is the dangerous situation, because once you repress this and put it into the body, that's when the body can react with illness. And you can lead to not only the physical illness, not only obviously the anxiety, but it will go bury into the body and produce blood pressure and strokes and even cancer. And that's really been my interest in this, because I believe that what is happening there actually is dangerous to the body, even homicidal, and that is coming from this constant bombardment of people. And it would seem to be the selected community, as you say, and I like that, get it. They're the ones that actually, whatever the forces are out there that are trying to get them, realize these other techniques aren't going to work on them, that they are supercharged. They're the superheroes, and so we're going to zap them. We're going to zap them early, and we're going to. About 10 years ago, a Rhodes Scholar. I don't know if you know what the term Rhodes Scholar. That's from overseas people who go to Oxford. Are selected. So the best academic minds are selected to go to Oxford. Well, I saw one of these young women come to me, and this is the story. She was a ecological scientist. She was an environmental scientist of the top order, probably New Zealand's sort of premier export when it comes to intellect. And she went to Oxford, and after her first term, she had went on a trip to Paris, and she was just walking down the street, and she collapsed like this, and had a fit, and she was taken to a hospital over there, and the neurologist couldn't find any reason why this had happened. But from that moment on, she became like a vegetable. She just went from woe to go to so. And they came to me in distress. They brought her back, and she was writhing. Found it difficult to communicate. She'd been to 3 or 4 neurologists by that time. And I remember thinking at the time, and I knew a bit about electromagnetic weaponry, I thought, this is strange. This sounds like she's been zapped. I felt that. And she went to and that was it. And then I thought, well, this person would well have changed our concepts of humanity, like so many others. And I'd have to say, when I learned of Catherine's story, I felt there was a similar link going on there. Luckily, Catherine has got, a full. Well, she's wonderful. She's
she's Oxford. She's Oxford also. She's not a Rhodes Scholar. She's not a Rhodes Scholar.
No, I know she isn't, but she's one that gets it. She's one that gets it. I'd like to think I'm a systems thinker as well. That's hence the understanding of the holographic fractal universe or whatever. And there's that ultimately the systems thinkers. So I think the system thinkers who can see patterns in the world and connect those patterns, large and small, are the ones that are probably at risk and a threat to the linear thinkers who are still dominant in our science and our lives.
Robin, you mentioned.
So anyway, that story brought it through to me, and that reawoken I had a reawakening of that understanding with your work recently.
Well, thanks. You mentioned that you work with post-traumatic stress. Are they similar to the TIs? I know the TIs are irritated all the time. They're constantly bombarded with some type of weaponry, gang stalking, some kind of something to set them off all the time.
Yes, there's I'd recommend the listeners to a website called Out of the Fog. Out of the Fog, and if you Google that and then CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress, you'll see, and I've got it here, I've just printed it out, what it feels like, complex post-traumatic stress. This is almost like a checklist that I go through with people coming to see me. And the difference between is, there's this hypervigilance, anxiety, all the things that they'll be experiencing as well, but in a jumbled way and a chaotic way, because that's how their lives have been attacked. And so I recommend people to go through this and look at this. And not despair with it, but to actually then to realize that this is totally recognized as a set of symptomatology which can be helped. And the interesting thing is, and I've noticed this as well, is that we all become hypervigilant, and we can be accused of being obsessional and all these and psychotic and all these things which our psychiatrists could label us, and that is part of the illness. That is actually probably what the TIs are being subjected to, so that they are then accused of being a bit crazy. They were crazy, and that because they become hypervigilant and they become hyper aware. But that seems to be part of that as well. But that is also the effect. I think we are, in general, the people who are attacked are perfectionists often, and it's all right to have your obsessions if your obsessions are for the good of humanity. In fact, we wouldn't be here without obsessions. But I know how people can be belittled and they're because of these symptoms. They can be further compound or isolation, and the isolation stops our healing. So it all becomes a vicious circle.
Yes. Yeah, they become hyper vigilant, and I think that's really an advantage in a way. The people that I know, the investigation team, I've watched them spelunking down the rabbit hole in an amazingly quick way. From 6 months ago when we started this, now the sophistication level about the why they're targeted, what they're targeted by, how to fight it, and their minds seem to be more and more open as we go through. And so if there's any good to this, it would be because it makes them hypervigilant, And although,
Yes.
in the long run, that does wear you down, and it can cause illnesses. But
But if you're in a loving relationship, then that helps, because I know my wife, when I get on a bit of a tangent, she says, "Oh, come on, Robin, go for a walk, and she counterbalances this."
mm-hmm.
You may well recognise this there. Not everybody is that lucky to have loving relationships in this way, who say, "Enough already, just do this." And that's where we come in as well, because we realise that's part of the healing as well, that somehow we have to be helped with this. But it's not a question. So many people will say, "Let it go. This is an awful thing." When you're in this, they'll say, "Let it go.
Right.
It's in your past." Okay, that's not part of me. And they'll say, "Let it go," or "compartmentalize this," or whatever. I say no. No, what we do is integrate this into our being so that we can help people. This is not to be separated in that dualistic fashion. This is to be integrated with support. When that happens, we talk holographically. If we are a holographic unit in a greater whole, then when we start doing that, it becomes integrated into our society. We need to integrate it. The vast majority of people have separated it. They've become cognitively dissonant to it. And then there's the other part, the 10% who actually know it's going on and are willfully blind at explaining it. Okay, but it's the dissonance that we're really up against. So ultimately, no, let's integrate this and become a mouthpiece. Let's not separate it. As far as getting over it is concerned, a lot of people mean by getting over it, forget it. But it doesn't. The body doesn't forget it. The body. That's what happens in trauma. The body remembers it. That's why we are triggered. So sure, we can get over being a victim. That's what I will say. Okay, yes, I'll let go of being a victim, but I'm not going to let go of my life experiences, because that is me. That's part of me. That's why I'm here. That's why everybody else is here.
I think that cognitive dissonance, I hope people understand what that is. It's when you hold two conflicting scenarios in your brain. This is what you've grown up with, and now this is what you're seeing. And if you hold them, cognitive dissonance, I think, is a mental illness, because you just really are holding things that are incompatible in your brain. The way to get around it is to see them together. You've got to meld them together. And what you'll do is you'll find that your brain produces a more complex understanding of what you're going through, because it's not holding things separately, it's putting them together. Now, together, how does this look? And it'll give you a little bit more complex. It's not easy. And I'm sure Dr. Robin has walked people through cognitive dissonance a lot to try to get them to...
I think you've mentioned, I think, in your left and right brain, that philosophy. Of course, there's more to it than that.
A lot more to it.
But if you're looking at chakras, and for instance, the crown chakra dependent on this balance up here, which has then gone through the heart. So you've gone through the heart, so your energy's ridden through your heart, so you're speaking to your heart through your voice. And then there's this total integrated balance which connects you to that unity consciousness. And what's happened over at least 7,000 years is it's the frontal part of the left brain has been so much in dominance, and there's been a compartmentalization of this. Therefore, everything at university is being argued at the moment by this reasonable left brain.
Right.
Incidentally, I'm seeing many PhD students who are women whose physiology goes completely crazy when they do a PhD. You know what a PhD is. It totally overtakes your life. But for a woman, it really screws with them, particularly if they're doing a PhD in anything holistic at all. They get really sick. And so I use these techniques to help balance them as well. So we are coming to this with our being, with the heart, the voice, and the brain, all in harmony, all in that sort of coherence, left and right. And that is the way there's no answer to this, because most of the attacks are coming from a very male, let's say, male paradigm, left brain cause and effect attack. We come from very much a being, an integrated being community, and that is to help people into that mode. I think it's our natural mode, and it's the natural mode that we should be evolving into. But this is how I help. So if somebody is interested in dance, or they were dancing 30 years ago and they say, oh, I don't have time for it now, you go back into your dance, you go back into your music, you go back into your that state of timeless being where you are feeling, you're contributing. Well, you just are into that state of being. So you become more and more integrated. Even, I don't know, I did a course in whirling dervishing at one stage, where which is a very gentle way of just turning and turning and turning. There's certain things one can do that are very simple, and in fact they're always very funny when you try and do this and laugh. That's when you're getting back into this much more integrated state that our children have. They just smile, they're naturally smiling and happy. There is no answer to those perpetrators of this darkness. They don't have an answer to that, that's one of the ways I guide people into that joyful, gentle, creative state.
Great. It'll be great to have your input from now on and on the portal. I have a question, and this is kind of related. You mentioned the chakra system. Now, it seems to me that the whoever's perpetrating, I don't know how to characterize them anymore. They consider themselves elites or Olympians or whatever they consider themselves. They seem to want to hold people in the lower chakras. That's why, they're sex cults. They're just sex cults. And so it's all about sex and sodomy and those kind of things to keep them from going up into the upper chakras. And it seems to me that some of these things that we're advocating that might help are to get out of your lower chakra and more into your heart chakra. I know there's a woman that we've been trying to get on for a while. She said, just love your perpetrators. And when I first heard this, I thought, well, how am I going to tell these people who are hit 24 hours a day by energy weapons to love their perpetrators? But for her, it works. Now they're slamming her. We're trying to get her on to talk a little bit, but of course they're really not wanting her to go there. But I just wanted to mention about that. I think the chakra system's relevant in this case, and I think a lot of these things kind of put you into a higher state. I know that my wife Mindy was talking to Ramola the other day, and they were talking about nature and just going into nature and getting into that kind of
thing. Absolutely, just being in nature. That's why we're lucky here. I mean, I'm sure you're lucky there as how to go into nature as well. Yes, from the chakra system, the battle is below the third chakra. The third chakra is personal power. On one side of the chakra, below the ribs, if you like, you have those who are the victims on one side, and therefore probably give their power to a god to which they are obliged to follow their orders, for instance. So there's one side. But the other side are the control freaks, the extreme narcissistic personalities. Now, we meet in the middle where we compromise, where we discover our own power that's in balance. Some could say that healthy narcissism, if that's not an oxymoron term.
Right.
But actually, when we find that this wonderful balance, incidentally, the stomach areas where people get stomach ulcers and reflux, that's when they're controlled from, if they're in work where they've got the boss controlling them and then they've got the clients controlling them, they're going to be stuck. Right. Yeah, okay, that's where the majority of people are. and you hear them, they burp a lot. So as that balances, that third chakra balances, that's when the personal power battle dissolves, and you go into the heart, which is the green, which is basically when you see life not in competition, but as a win-win cooperative venture. In with nature. So that's where the green movement is moving into there. Now, once the energy gets into the heart, and you're allowed to live in your heart, in other words, which is your basic energetic being. The heart is many times more electrical than the brain. And then it rises so that you have your voice, so you can express what your heart says. Then, relatively quickly, it can come up and harmonize the brain. So you've got this harmony between heart and voice and brain. You see many people who with sinus problems and blocks here, and they're the ones that it's just waiting for their spirituality to grow, their personal spirituality to grow, away from their conditioned spirituality, for instance. So one of the medicine that I love is to identify where these blockages are, because they're so simple to relate back to the person. In Chinese medicine, where we've got the meridians and we've got a lot of complex conditions, it's not as easy to relate this back to the person. It's fascinating, and I use acupuncture all the time, and will try and relate this back. But most people will know that if they're sad, they're going to feel heavy in the left chest, in the chakra, the heart chakra. They're going to feel so. This type of understanding of our human condition, I have found over the last 20 years, incredibly helpful, because the person gets it and it opens up a deeper understanding of what is happening. And what we're doing is allowing them for the hearts to open to them. That's the compassion that they need for themselves. And then the voices to open, and then you've got this harmony. And I believe the perpetrators, if they realize this, and I'm not sure if they do realize this is totally out of their control, if enough people do it. They don't, because they're still locked into the lower chakras, where personal power and vendettas and attacks are important. And I think so. As far as loving them, it's a difficult one. I'm a bit conflicted in this loving thing, having come into contact recently with so many psychopaths, and know that they can use this. We have to be really quite careful. I think deep down we can love humanity so much that we do not want this small percentage to control so many others who are asleep. And I think that's where possibly our love and compassion should go. And we've got to have to be careful, because if they will draw you in to a state where you are open-hearted to a point that they can attack. So I'm still working through that, although I do admire the Buddhist monks who have been incarcerated around the world, who learn to love those who are incarcerating them and torturing them. I really admire that, but I'm a bit conflicted about how we go about that at the moment. That's just me.
No, I'm glad to hear that. We were talking this morning about the difference between perpetrators and targets. And we came to the conclusion that most perpetrators are probably targets. I know if you go into the satanic practices of ritual child abuse, a lot of these people came up, and where exactly do you start to blame? Do you start at 2 generations back? Do you blame this person? But we're really hung up on people being able to free themselves so much from their past that they can exercise free will no matter where they come from. And I'm not exactly sure whether that's practical, but I'm really glad you took us through your understanding of that too. As we go down the road on this, and we throw things out, and we look at how we're trying to help, how people are trying to work through this. It's interesting, again, to form community, to keep this open source investigation going, so we can find out just exactly what this means and how this might work. Now, when you're working with the chakra system, I don't want to emphasize this too much, but this is, I certainly see the controllers or the powers that shouldn't be trying to lock people down in the lower chakras. That seems to be really obvious by all the practices that they do. I mean, including child molestation, cannibalism, and everything. And you work, I can see where acupuncture could really work, because it's freeing the prana or the chi to flow up. Now, your fear is going to lock them back down again, I think. Are there things that you have them do? I hate to say cognitively, because I think a lot of times you're dealing with the heart. Are there ways that you talk through, like talk therapy, get them to work with this system?
Yeah, and it depends on the individual. I think you're right. Just before I go on to that, when you treat someone with acupuncture, you're helping them get into this different state, the state of being. Most of the time, if you do very gentle acupuncture for just systemically, the person will escape the fight and flight mode, in other words, which is our stress mode, which drains our adrenals and the rest. And they'll go into a state of being, of acceptance. And for many people, they need help with that. Okay, you can say to the person, okay, let's do a little meditation, let's breathe to the tummy, and they may not be ready for that. So I use acupuncture technique, not only to focus on, what's going on in their body, because they have physical illness as well as a result of this, but to get them into that mode where they are appreciating this state of being. And the other thing that it involves, of course, is touch. And one of the things that has been so misused, both in men and women in their lives, is touch. It's amazing how many men haven't been touched in a healing, non-aggressive, non-sexual way. Right. And the same with women. So I always think just this whole state, this ritual that we're going through, even before we analyze its individual parts, has real meaning for people. Even somebody lying down for 10 minutes or 20 minutes in the day without guilt is important.
It is.
And their addiction has been their busyness, for instance. Their escape has been their busyness as well. So the acupuncture creates this state of being into which we will then say, well, how can you do this yourself? Through simple methods. One of the things I go through, this is the therapies I use, would be an adaptation of what they call emotional freedom techniques and tapping. Because what happens when you tap is that you are focusing back on the body, and you're actually tapping yourself with intent over acupuncture areas, but you're not being invasive. And there are two elements to the tapping. First of all, you're really just saying back to the body what the body is telling you without judgment at all. You're not. This isn't an affirmation like every day I'm getting better, and I love my psychopath necessarily. Right. It might say I hate my psychopath, but it's actually, so even though I'm really feeling this pain, or I'm feeling this emptiness, and I'm targeted or whatever, there's two parts of it. That's the first part, and I actually write that within an infinity sign. That first part I go, even though I feel this. And it's just being honest back to the body, just saying, hey, I hear you. I hear you, what's going on inside. And then you say, I have compassion for myself. So the second part, so the two parts of healing is an acknowledgement of who you are without judgment, an acceptance, which doesn't mean waving a white flag, and then a state of compassion to yourself. Now, that is really difficult for people. And our role as any human being, not just a healer, is to induce a sense of compassion in that person for themselves as much as we have for them. and that can take time, and that is the block that we go through. So as far as talk therapy is concerned, we will not try to use our mental faculties to solve this. We tend to use our basic being to settle this, and our compassion to settle this as well. You know what? So many people live in their brain. So if, say, I have a lawyer who's being under attack or whatever, or having stress, the last thing I want to do is get them into their argumentative brain.
Exactly.
I want to get them away from that. And, you know, for so many people, it's just to say that this is why the breath is so important. Just bring the breath down, and instead of just allow your tummy to expand and just focus on that breath going down there. And then there's a Qigong breath where you breathe in twice, and then as you breathe out, you breathe in and you breathe out. But the breath involves sending the breath, not just to the tummy, but to the heart, as if there's a highway down there and there's a highway to the heart. So the focus for the people is away from their head, which is where I believe the perpetrators, whatever we call them, are so much in their heads, and their heads are so much in control, that if you bring it down to your being, you have the answer to the issue. And it's something that they cannot counteract, because there's a purity of spirit in what we're doing.
That's why when I think I was wrong with the right and left brain, but I do think that if you think of it as a metaphor, I mean, certainly
it is a metaphor.
That they have trained us to be in our left brain. We're very analytical. That's why to see this thing as a gestalt, to see the macro, what's going on, is very difficult, because we're only taught to analyze. I'm going to go through that and see if I can shed some light on that in broadcasts we do on Sunday. But I wanted to ask you, you focused on guilt, and I think guilt is a real important thing to focus on. Guilt is supposedly one of the lowest resonance frequencies. So they've got to be loving it when you're in guilt. But when I'm talking to somebody about guilt, I always remind them that guilt is self-hatred. And there's really no reason to hate yourself. I mean, you're what you are, you know. And so I try to diffuse the guilt when I'm talking by reminding them that you've got to appreciate yourself and love yourself, which is what you're trying to do. Get them into the heart chakra. Also, I've been finding out that your heart is actually a source of great intelligence. And it's certainly not just a pump. It has a lot more to do than just that.
Well, all these exercises are heart focused, and the great resource is, of course, the heart math initiatives, who basically were saying that we need this perfect harmony between heart and head, and that's what I've said. But you'll find that all this focus is back into this heart area, which again is beyond. This is a love that's beyond true rationality in this way. It doesn't mean that you become irrational at all, because we add our brain. But basically, if you follow your heart, you then apply your brain how you're going to do that.
Right.
So the heart and head work in harmony. Very, very important, and not, it's the focus of yoga, of course, as well, and it's a true yogi will follow one's heart, but when threatened, of course, will act. I often say, look at the cat, because the cat's sitting there purring, meditating a lot of the time, but a mouse comes, it gets it. Okay, so that's how we should be, in this state of a constant awareness, but with surprise attacks whenever we need to.
Exactly.
You know, the cats teach us a lot. Of course, the dogs do as well, but the cats teach us a lot.
That's why when we were thinking of a name for the open source investigation, we wanted to call it a portal, because I think the answer isn't to be in meditation and some kind of a heartfelt thing. It's the ability to go back and forth from your rational brain. And I remember coaching a high-powered lawyer, and I had done some psychological testing on him, and he was heart-based. He was an intuitive, and I said, "Boy, you're a high-powered corporate lawyer." I said, "How do you do that, being a very intuitive kind of a sensitive guy?" He says, "Well, my heart tells me where to go." He had to investigate. You have to do a lot of investigation when you're doing this. What are the precedents and things? He says, "My heart tells me where to look, and I use my rational brain when I get there." So that might be an example of going back and forth in the portal.
Yes, so that is. It's where your heart, interest, and taste, and then your mind has to be engaged rationally. How you're going to create this life that your heart is, your heart's in it, and you see that the number of people who are whose life is and personality and soul are all integrated, are living a dream. And there may not be a materialistic dream, but ultimately there's an element of that needs to be infused in, I suppose, all of us. Follow one's heart, but use one's head.
Right,
Yeah.
you've got to really have that. I noticed there's a big push on the part of the controlling faction to use techno music, and they're doing these things called Tomorrowland festivals, where it's very Dionysian, if you know what I mean. Very, very debauchery kind of focused to get you out of your mind. Well, the idea is you have your heart and your mind, and using them together is the escape, not doing away with
I think
one.
you can see that's good, getting into a trance state, but also you're vulnerable in that trance state as well. So one has to be a little bit cautious about what's going on there, how it's used, the intent it's used there. Oh, here I've got the brain of the human hologram. I'll read this from Frank Baum from The Wizard of Oz. "All the same," said the scarecrow, "I shall ask for brains instead of a heart, for a fool would not know what to do with a heart if he had one. I shall take the heart," returned the Tin Woodman, "but brains do not make one happy, and happiness is the best thing in the world." Okay,
that's
so
beautiful.
that's from The Wizard of Oz. Okay,
that's beautiful. They're really sending us a lot of information. We have to listen to it. So it's really interesting to know someone that's really not just pushing the TIs away, but actually appreciating what they're going through and helping them deal with it in the moment. The Techno Crime Fighter Forum is going toward gathering evidence and going against them on a judicial basis and human. I know that Ramol is really pushing to get the information on what targets are going through out there. But I think this side of it also has to be going to try to get us through the suffering. When you're teaching someone to do yoga or breathing techniques, you mentioned that there can be a little bit of a danger to it. Is there something that you tell them to go into or surround themselves with? I know we've done that in certain Eastern techniques. Surround yourself with kind of a protective barrier.
Yeah, I've tried that, and it didn't work for me too much because I felt that I then was trying to restrict my own receptiveness and my own sensitivity and artistry or whatever. So I found it quite difficult to put a barrier around me. I think it does work for some people, and I think it's I think, as we've said, there are dangers of opening one's heart out to maybe somebody on the extreme end of the narcissistic spectrum into the psychopathy system, because unless one is very skilled, they will attack into that area, draw you in and do that as well. And so I think there are certain rituals one can do to protect oneself. I know Paul Levy, he comes out with a mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, which is basically the Buddhist mantra. And I've used that, and I will focus on, sometimes I will focus on that if somebody wants something. So rather than a barrier, it may well be a chant that they can use. And some people in the EFT community will use the infinity sign. So if you've got a neighbor who is aggressively stalking you or whatever, and I think this is a big part of the TI issue, then there are certain signs and symbols you can use that some people found very helpful indeed. So I think there are ways that we can do this without putting a protective element so much around us that we lose our sense of connection with the world. But I think it is different for different people. And I've said, there's some people that will work for. I know my Buddhist mentor, Stephen Ong, who's a Buddhist physician, talks about heart open and heart closed. And I think there is that element of being able to close one's heart to attack, but that doesn't mean close one's heart to one's own self-compassion. So I'm working through that. So I think what you're doing in community is the way, because I think that if there's a community of people who have been vulnerable, who understand it, they're cloaked basically with the warmth of the community who understand. And somehow that, I think, is going to be the best protection for them as they then discover ways they can protect themselves. These entitled entities or beings are so direct. They've been doing this for a long time, and I don't think we can win at their game, basically. We have to escape. We go into this other level of understanding and being, and I think so many people are there, which is about connectivity and connective compassion, and also just a deeper understanding of the human condition. I believe this is how we're going to counteract the pressures of artificial intelligence, which is still based on this very primitive concept that our brain is the producer of consciousness. I wonder whether the actions that we're taking is actually highly important, almost like we're a cohort of individuals who are going to be challenging this so that it is not going to take over our humanity in such a negative way. I certainly have huge concerns about artificial intelligence. And incidentally, you mentioned going down the rabbit hole. The more you persist with this, like we have with our case, it's gone from actually different levels of consciousness. We discover that the group, the international company, our judge and our main defendant and aggressor in our lives, they're concerned with, there's a group called Action Step, which seems to be a mind mapping software for lawyers. And I just looked at this and I thought, internationally, could this possibly be used for bad reasons? Could you predict? And apparently they're selling it to lawyers. They're saying, well, we'll mind map you so that you can run your business and you can go off fishing for a week and your practice will carry on as if you're not there. So I'm thinking, well, I wonder if in the wrong hands whether this is a great idea. And who has got access to this information? If they're international lawyers or international trade dealers or arms dealers or whatever. What is going on here? So the deeper you go on, you go down the rabbit hole, the more red flags you find.
That's right.
Think everything is really connected here. Yeah. And I think that that's what I can add to this. You know, I was thinking, well, the more you go down, the more you think, wow, what am I involved with? You know.
Right. It's interesting to go down and to see what their declared purposes are, and how they're getting there, and whether their declared purposes are actually their purpose. So I'm exploring that a lot, and but the AI thing, I think that there's. See, I'm a consciousness study guy, so I think there's a lot more to you than what's in your brain. I think your brain is a component of consciousness, and there's a lot more to you than is in your brain.
It's a filter in and a filter out, and we filter out a lot, and we filter in these realities, and yeah. And
they can make the replica of the again, I'm going to use that metaphor, the left brain, because the left brain seems to work on algorithms. You know,
yes.
And that's why they want to know your decision points, because they can map that in an algorithm. I don't think the brain that's connected to your heart, to the universe, I don't think it works on an algorithm. I think it works on direct knowing. I mean, how many times have you met someone and absolutely knew that you knew them in the past? And it turns out that they play a big part in your life subsequently. Well, how did you know that? You didn't go through an algorithm. You just knew it. And that's a big component that I don't think the AI can map. Also, this is an opinion. I think if anybody should be worried about the AI, it should be Evelyn Rothschild or the Pope. The people who really have something to lose when AI takes over. So if there is a thing like AI, and if indeed it'll operate independently and make its own decisions, if I were Kissinger, Soros, Rothschild, or any of those guys, I'd be worried about the AI, but they don't seem to be concerned at all. So I'm not sure if it's, I don't know, I'm just kind of working through that in my mind.
No, it's interesting what you're saying about the left brain as well. The psychopathic brain, which they've studied under functional MRIs, shows that the connection between the emotional brain, the hippocampus, the dog agrees, the hippocampus and the amygdala, that's faulty. There's no connection, and therefore there's no connection between emotions and empathy and the brain. There's no higher checklist, if you like, checker on this as well. So isn't that interesting? So the people preventing this will be probably focused very much on this brain in isolation. Sorry, left brain in isolation to their heart, because if you look at the heart math research, it's about harmony. It's about harmony, harmonic waves, harmony of head and heart, of which the psychopathic brains, who may well be involved in this AI stuff, have no concept of that at all. They just see that this frontal left part, which is their entitlement, their intellectual entitlement, if you like, as being the highest center that possibly there could be. And we're going to base all our algorithms on this very point. Okay, which is what happens with what we've learned about the psychopathic brain is very sadly that what happens if two people, an empathetic person, a normal empathetic person, is shown a video of somebody squashing their fingers in the car door, they will react as if it's themselves. They will react with pain. The psychopathic brain won't react this way. The amygdala won't light up unless they're told that it's their fingers. Okay, so if it's told of their fingers, they don't like that. But what will happen if they're told it's somebody else's fingers? What shoots off of the basic ganglia, shooting off dopamine, which is an addictive substance. In other words, there is an addiction to the suffering of that person. So they actually are addicted to the suffering of that person. This is the other reason one shouldn't open one's heart easily to a psychopath, because ultimately they are not addicted to the money or the power that, as we would normally feel. They're addicted to watching others suffer. Right. And we have to be very careful about that. And that may be only 1%. Maybe those are the ones they feel are congenital. That doesn't mean that they haven't built up epigenetically over thousands of years. But they're the ones that will not shift. They are the serial killers, but they also will be the perpetrators in some of this, what we'll be talking about as well. So the brain's interesting. So the toxic element of the psychopathic brain system, consciousness, if you like, is toxic to the majority. And your work and my work is talking about the majority. It's the compassion for the 95%, right, not the compassion for the 1% who you don't have to hate them. You just have to ignore. You have to be better than them and beat them. You don't have to. Do not try to counteract them with hate, because they've got so much hate. They'll win every time.
Yeah, they're perfectly designed for the job they seem to be doing.
Yeah.
I know I was listening to Ole Damagard, and he was talking about how they make a serial killer. And I know that some of the elites do this to their children. You know, they'll give them a puppy, and then they'll kill the puppy, or to try to break that connection with compassion, and to try to produce a psychopath or a parapsychopath based on some torture that they've been through. Also, torture. Some people say you can't return from torture. Once you've been tortured, it changes your brain. I wanted to ask you a question about the corpus callosum, the connection between the left and right brain. Well, I have read that in females, that's a lot more developed. There's a lot more connection there. And I wonder if that has to do with the fact that most people that are targeted, some people estimate 70 to 75%, are females.
Oh, well. Yeah, look, I didn't know that. I was just going to come to this because when I run a practice for chronic illness, and 70% of the people with chronic illness, the autoimmune conditions, the rheumatoid arthritis, where the body's attacking itself, basically, are women. And this, culturally, we can see that women with this much more balanced brain, which is focused on compassion and maternal love, have been gaslighted for thousands of years. Patch Adams, I don't know if you know Patch Adams, the great revolutionary doctor, says this for sure, that this has been the issue. We've had 7,000 years of war, male-dominated frontal left brain oppression. So the gaslighting and the oppression of women has been massive, and has led to these illnesses that they're presenting now. We're getting men presenting with those illnesses even more now as well, and they're usually the more enlightened ones. So ultimately, this is because of this very linear perception of life, and basically the dumbing down of the maternal role. And so it is not surprising that the women are the ones who get it. The women are the first ones to pick up on whenever a drug has an adverse effect on their bodies. When it came to statins, the statins, the cholesterol drugs, the men, I instantly noticed when the men were taken and they said they were tired and achy and all sorts of issues. As soon as, and then the pharmaceutical companies targeted women as well. As soon as the women happened, they said, hey, we're just feeling lousy with this. We want a bar of this. And so the women are always ahead of the game. And it's because of their more integrated structure there. And I think now, within certainly parts of the world anyway, they are given more of an education. You'll find that they're the ones who are being targeted. And certainly from my experience from that young lady who was zapped in France, as far as I could see, and Catherine and the like, those are the ones that have got it together, and it makes the most sense. They're pretty well terrified of the rationality. If they combine this with intense rationality and wonderful research and diligent data, that's who they'll get at. I think in some ways I've experienced that as well, because it's sort of within the medical profession generally, it's been a modern materialistic, it's based on modern materialistic science, where they've tried to cut out emotion or whatever, but at the same instance have produced masses of antidepressants without really understanding emotion. So we, in some ways, women are going to be attacked as well, but also, I suppose, feminist men as well, who appreciate them, are going to be attacked as well.
Right. I can see that. I see the people that, at least the people that are on the joint investigation team. They're very strong, left brain, rational. I mean, to the extent that they leave me in the dust sometimes. They're so, analytical and way to go. But they also have a complementary, compassionate hearts inside.
Yeah.
And if I were trying to do something with the world like like our enemies are doing, like our oppressors are doing, these are the kind of people I would target. First of all, they're women, so they have that connection between them, and they have strength on both sides. So, I can see why they could be a threat. Myself, and every time
women have been much better than us in forming groups, and men's health. Women are really helped by their own group of peers, So I always encourage them, and they talk much more openly about their lives and their emotions. We're pretty hopeless with this stuff, and that creates our own denial,
right,
which goes into our heart issues and our blood pressures because we're not expressing them. So now we're seeing with the women, there's much better, wonderful balance between the two. You see, this accusation everybody has of you're a conspiracy theorist. This is the sort of like the ultimate gaslighting. What happens is that, no, what you do is you gather the data, you gather all the information, and then you look at why that information is not mainstream, why the narrative is so ignores all this. So you then look for the conspiracy. You actually look at why this hasn't been taken up by the mainstream. And there's many levels of that. There may well be perpetrators that are suppressing this information, but then there's the sycophants who are doing it, and the willfully blind who are following the old school because they're being paid for it, and if they object, they'll lose their job and their house. And then there's the vast majority of people who care and basically are cognitively dissonant and haven't a clue. So the whole conspiracy thing falls down if you do your research, because you do the data and you threaten the people. We're seeing that in the whole vaccination field thing as well at the moment with Vaxxed, where there are a lot of top scientists that are looking at what is going into the vaccination. But the argument is being argued on guilt and emotion from the pro-vaxxers and the anti-vaxxers, whereas the science, the proper science, is going to be sorting this out. And then an advocate, okay, so then there's somebody who can speak this. And that's throughout. So your group is doing exactly right. It's gathering the data to such an extent that there's no answer to it. Or if there is an answer to it, it's so what they reply with is inadequate. and then they'll resort, of course, because they always resort to ad hominem ictas, and to begin with, which is the whole conspiracy thing. You're a conspiracy theorist. You're a bit crazy. You've got the psychosis. you're obsessional and all that. None of that will work once you've got the data, and yet they'll still do it. They'll just yell greater, more and more, and zap people more and more. That's probably, right. You know. Well, but it's the facts that will scare them,
right. Exactly,
and drive them away. So it's brilliant what you're doing. Brilliant.
Well, I hope we do have really good researchers on that team. Catherine and I were talking when we first met. We did a lot of stuff on. I'm an organizational development psychologist, and she's done system work. So we've decided that for conspiracy theories, we're going to use the term that they use inside businesses, and that is business plans.
Yeah.
Business plans.
Yeah.
I mean, if Mars bars wants to take over 75% of the market, they're going to conspire. In other words, they're going to make a business plan to get that market share. And that's
but conspire just means
thing.
Breathe together. You conspire. It means we breathe together. Well,
right.
Why have we created this sort of attack on? This is wonderful nonsense. Yeah.
Let me bounce back to the men and women thing. I can remember. I guess this was about 10 years ago now. We were designing. It was important for me as an executive coach to try to develop more women that can go into the high-level positions. Now, the organizations that I worked with were big international organizations, and they would speak the desire to do that. And sometimes they would certainly pick certain women to help them with that. But that wasn't an underlying motivation. But what we were doing, myself and another consultant, we designed, since women are wired so much differently, to develop a woman executive requires a little bit of a different technique. And it focused around the men's natural competitiveness, which is how we traditionally develop executives. And women have a natural cooperativeness. So if using that cooperativeness can help them, and community can help them rise above and get to higher levels of functionality. That's what we wanted to do. Now, it didn't get very far off the ground, but I still think it would work because they are wired differently, and I think maybe that's why they're targeted. And maybe the community aspect that you're stressing is exactly what needs to be stressed going into, as we're fighting this, and then because I really have noticed since we've been in this business, and we've been doing it for about a year, talking to targeted individuals, and we've been doing the crime fighters for about 6 months. The community that's building up around us is phenomenal. You probably noticed that in your practice. Enough so that go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you on this as well. And it is the women. Basically, the heart focus. You see, the maternal connection is through the heart and the breasts, and this is. You wonder why there is so much breast cancer, and that conflicts are built up within our culture to the nurturing of others. So this is, and that has been repressed and suppressed. When a woman does get breast cancer, and they come and see me because they're often going through the chemo and everything, my job really is to introduce them to a community if they haven't got one. If there's conflict within their family, which there often is, then we become part of the community. Okay, so the community is the answer. And also obviously compassion and self-compassion, so that compassion for the woman isn't just going out to another soul, albeit their own child. It's going to be coming through back into them as well. and these are huge issues as well. I mean, I think the use of course, so many corporates use women as their front person but for the wrong intent, usually, isn't it? To sort of to soften the the terrible message that they're putting out,
right.
and to suck women and children in as well. Women are wise to this now, and I think what you're saying is absolutely right. Incidentally, Catherine's work on the pyramid system and the psychopathic pyramid, I was intrigued by as well. Actually, I did a video myself, trying to explain it to others as well, and how in this system the sludge rises to the top. You know, we talk about the cream rising to the top, and this seems to be the dark sludge rises to the top, and it's so funny. And I applied it totally to my situation as well, and I see it happening all the time, the infiltration that occurs, and it's desperately interesting. I love it, and it's also, you know, I'm a systems thinker. When Eastern thought is systems and relationships, we base it on that, and that is why I think integrating that side of the East with the West is the way forward in this. That's my focus in individual health, but also for this community health. Absolutely, yeah.
I think integration is the way out, and how to achieve that, I don't know. But escaping into various little cul-de-sacs or how can I call them? They're like little traps of knowledge. Okay, this is where I am. I believe this set of things, and anything outside of this set of things has got to be wrong because it's not within my set of beliefs. I think in order to work through this and form communities effectively, we really have to take the lid off of that. And we have to understand that there are a lot of people with a lot of different viewpoints and feelings, but we're all working through the same thing together. And that's a really powerful piece. And integrating the East with the West right now is, I think, really different. In Eastern psychologies, in Western psychologies, the major focus, I think, is making them functional in society, because the definition of someone who is, used to be neurotic, but they don't use it anymore, is someone who is not functional in society. In Eastern societies, psychology is used to make someone, how can I say, view the world and their life in a more comprehensive manner. In other words, do away with cognitive dissonance. Have them get together and look at the whole pattern and try to rise above. That's the whole focus of Eastern teachings and Eastern philosophies, is to try to grow. I call it consciousness, but you could call it 100 other things. So the integration of both now, I think, is a real step in our climbing out of the dilemma that unfortunately we've been put in. And unfortunately, the people who are targeted are really feeling the brunt of this. Well said, yeah. I think with the Eastern, when I do acupuncture, I explain that the person being has presented me with a pattern, and I'm replying to the body with a constellation, a pattern, connecting the dots, and that's what you do. You're creating, and you're opening up a dialogue with a on a level or a non-linear level, a pattern, and you're responding in that way. And this is escaping that. It's acknowledging the duality, the yin and yang, but it's actually saying that's a part of life, but it's not the overriding one as far as duality is concerned. It's not just black and white. You're not
ill and well. Your body is communicating through symptoms vital information back to me as well. It's a whole way of thinking, a whole way of being, which is very mature and can be integrated into what we're doing at Pinecone Utopia. To me, it's that's the focus of this, joining the dots. And then you sort of just allow it to happen. To be honest, there's a certain aspect of letting it be. There's also just one thing because you probably have got things to do today, and I know I'm probably keeping it.
Well, here's what I'm thinking. Don't forget what you're going to say. Here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that this is a fantastic interview. You're incredible. You're like a godsend to us. And I'd like to continue these interviews. I'll talk to the joint investigation team, see if they'd like you to come on with them, and then we can continue this. So anyway, make your point. I hope you haven't forgotten it. I didn't mean to.
I was going to say, and I just says that as you heal, I always ask the person to look out for a synchronicity. And it's usually a synchronicity that is quite light-hearted, means nothing to anybody else, but to you and to the person, it is very, very, it touches you, okay? And it can be two butterflies or a bird in the tree, and it has meaning. And that is their guide that they're on the right track, okay? So this is coming from a connected, collective, universal consciousness that says, yay, that's good. I just want to tell you one thing. When I think you replied asking me on to this show, and it was wonderful, about 3 o'clock at night. And I woke up at 3 o'clock at night, and I have a hi-fi downstairs. I woke up and I heard this sort of drum and bass, and I was thinking, this is some kid out in a car listening to drum and bass, As a little, and then I got a little bit annoyed. I thought, shall I go out and let him know? And then, so I came down and I find my hi-fi downstairs blaring. It had started itself at the very time. And then I looked in the morning. I said, when did you contact me? And it was exactly the same time. So therefore, you turned on the hi-fi. It was. So thank you. So to me, that had quite a bit of synchronicity. So I don't know if that ever happens, because we know about the attacks and the delay and all the things they can do to broadcasts like this. But there's a little bit of a funny thing goes on as well. So there's a few angels maybe that press the button when we're on the right track. So I thought you might like to know that. And it just turned it on, and it had been turned off, It was blaring away.
That's great.
To Ray Davies from the Kinks, that's what I love, okay? So there you go. So those are the little synchronicities. So then I thought, I better do this.
Yes, that's great. Well, I'm so happy that we were able to turn on your Wi-Fi. One of the things that I always say is if you really want to get in sync with what's going on, throw out the word coincidence. And anytime something like this happens, do exactly what you did. What does this mean?
Yes.
How is this playing out for me? What should I do next? Well, Dr. Robin Kelly, thank you very much for being with us. We're going to try to get this up as soon as we can, and we'll send you a copy. It's just been real. We're going to stay in touch. I really consider you a part of Pinecone Utopia portal now. Anything that you think we should be doing and we're not doing, we'll follow up with subsequent interviews, I hope. And I'm sure the joint investigation team will be loving this interview and wanting to know you more and more. So thank you very much, Dr. Robin.
Well, look, I'm deeply honored as well, and like everybody on the team, we're learning as well. Any feedback that I can get is so valuable. I mean, this is how I'm learning. So thank you very much, both of you, and the whole team. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.